Hello everybody, my name is Spoons Rattling, and welcome back to another tier list video, where today we are doing something a little different. We're doing a bunch of the walkers of 40k. I believe this is just about all of them, but there's maybe a couple that slipped through the crack. This isn't all the variants. For example, I didn't include all, 8 variations of the standard Imperial Knight. I'm sort of going off of the chassis mainly, though. For ones that only had a couple variants, I still threw those in. So first up, we have the Crisis suits of the Tau. I quite like the Crisis suits. I think they are very cool. I'm going to give them an A tier. I think that they're maybe a little squat. I certainly think they could get a new model, or new models rather. But I think the Crisis suits are really cool. I like the akimbo weapons look, and in general, I quite like battle suits. So I think he's an easy A tier. Next up, we have the Venerable Dreadnought, which is also representing the Castaferums as the whole. I love the Venerable Dreadnought. I love the old box knot design, and the Venerable Dreadnought is the peak of that design, really. He's the most modern version of it. He's got the coolest bits, the most weapons, and overall, I quite like him. I think he's really cool. I definitely want to get one and paint him up like Davian Thule from Dawn of War 2, if anyone here has played that. But I think it's overall just a great model design-wise. Dreadnoughts on their own are very cool. They're big, they're bulky, they're boxy, they're stout. They're really everything I like in Warhammer 40k, you know? And the same pretty much goes for Bjorn. Bjorn is just a very fancy Venerable Dreadnought, and the Fell Hand is I don't know if that's the name of his melee weapon, but his unique melee weapon is very cool. And he has an assault cannon, and assault cannons are my favorite weapon for Dreadnoughts. Next up, we have the Space Wolves Venerable Dreadnought. This also is Murder Fang in the Wolfen Dreadnought. Also really cool. I know it's kind of cheating, just put all the Castaferums up there, but it's true. I love the Castaferum Dreadnought. And this guy's a big axe and shield, which is pretty cool. Probably going to end up near the lower end of S tier. Actually, I'm going to put him down in A tier. The axe and sword are cool. Axe and shield are cool, but I generally prefer other sort of dedicated melee dreadnoughts. Next up, we have the Redemptor, easily up here in S tier as well. It's just a bigger, beefier Redemptor with some really cool guns and a big melee weapon. I love the Redemptor. It's very customizable, very posable. It's just such a cool model. Definitely one of the ones that they just hit it out of the park. The Redemptor chassis is fantastic. I love the Redemptor. There's a reason that one of the first lists that I drafted up in 10th edition was just 3 of each kind of dreadnought to have a crazy, dreadnought army. Redemptor, though, fantastic. These two could swap places, but I don't think I will. I think I'll give the elderly bonus to the Castaferum. Next up, we have the Invictor Tactical Warsuit, and I'm not quite as high on the Invictor. It's probably going to end up at the top of C tier, maybe the bottom of B tier, though, if I'm feeling generous. It's just not my favorite kind of walker. Generally, lightly armored walkers aren't my favorite, though I still think it's pretty cool, though it's definitely not as cool as a Dreadnought. I think the Invictor overall, though, is totally fine. I quite like its guns, the big heavy stubber or the big flame cannon, and I really like that it has a heavy bolter as its pistol. I do really like that. So you know what? I'll give it B tier. Next up, the Brutalis Dreadnought. I'm just going to put it next to the Redemptor. The Brutalis is also really cool. I love the big talons. I love the multi-meltas. And it's still on the Redemptor chassis, and I love the Redemptor chassis, so unsurprisingly, I love this Dreadnought. It's got a little bit of extra armor going on. And while I generally prefer like mixed role kind of Dreadnoughts, unless they have like a hammer option, overall, I generally slightly prefer ones that have at least one gun, except for like Hellbrutes. I generally prefer them as melee monsters. Next up, we have the Ballistus, and I'm going to put the Ballistus behind the Brutalis, because I generally prefer the mixed look more than the dedicated look, you know? And there's really not much more I can say about the Redemptors. I love Redemptors, and they're sick, and everything on that chassis is really cool. And I can't wait for the day that we maybe get like a Venerable Redemptor Dreadnought, because that's going to be really, really cool. Yeah, it's absolutely fantastic. Brutalis, Ballistus, Redemptor, all fantastic. Next up, we have the Defiler, and I quite like the Defiler. It's certainly on the older end of things, and the Electro Scourge looks a little bit silly, but there's something about the Defiler that's just really endearing to me. I quite like crab walkers as a whole, and it's really sort of the only crab walker in Warhammer. It's got the big claws, it's got a lot of cool weapons. Definitely a little some questionable build options. Some of the heads look pretty bad, but I think the Defiler overall probably gonna end up at the bottom of S tier. I can't wait until the Defiler gets an update. I think it's gonna look awesome because the Defiler design is just awesome. Next up, we have the Hellbrute. I'm going to put the Hellbrute probably at the top of A tier. It could bump up, though, if I'm feeling generous. I quite like all its melee weapons. I think they look... Or all its melee weapons, for sure. It's got a big hammer. That's a home run for a dreadnought. And then, of course, it's got a cool suite of ranged weapons. You know, it's got the autocannon, the plasma cannon that's permanently on overcharge, everything the Hellbrute can take, I really like. The Electro Scourge looks really, really cool. I love the writhing tentacles look. And I think Hellbrutes are pretty awesome. I mean, they're just, demon-possessed Castaferums. I know that's not really the lore, but you know what I mean. It's a very twisted version of the Castaferum Dreadnought. And it's very cool. Next up, we have the Mauler Fiend. And Mauler Fiend's also very cool. I quite like the general chassis of these. I didn't include the Forge Fiend because... I mean, I feel very similar about them, and the Mauler Fiend is pretty cool. Is cooler in my opinion. Love the big gorilla look. Its tendrils, mechadendrites, kind of remind me of Doc Ock in a way. Which Doc Ock is my favorite Spider-Man villain, so that's a good thing. And overall, I just really like the Mauler Fiend. It feels very much like the spirit of what a demon engine should be, right? It's this heavily armored sort of monster that's not really something identifiable as like a real-world creature. It's like somewhere between like a dinosaur and a gorilla with a little bit of like a rhino mixed in. I love the Defiler, or not the Defiler, the Mauler Fiend. I'm actually going to bump it above the Venerable. I love it. Next up, we have the Chaos Knights, represented by the Knight Abominant, which is my favorite build for it. And I quite like the Knight Abominant, but also Chaos Knights on the whole. I think they look quite cool. The only reason that they're separated from the Questoris Knights regularly is because they have different legs, which is the main thing. But yeah, the Chaos Knights look absolutely fantastic. Just absolutely love Chaos Knights. They're so, so cool. And next up, we're on to the biggest plastic model GW has made to date, the Stampa. Now, not only am I an Orc player, I'm a Warhammer player. And I don't think I've ever met someone who didn't at least like the Stampa, ironically, at the very least. Stampa, one of the coolest walkers in 40k. It's just so ridiculous, so orky. Definitely thinking of picking one up. Maybe I'll pick one up next month when I get paid with my YouTube money. The Stampa, just so, so cool. Ginormous. Like, this thing is the size of a Warhound Titan. Crazy amount of guns. It's got a huge sort of chain cannon, giant rocket launchers. It's got the huge chain sword. The Stampa is so sick. And it's honestly a disservice that I've been collecting orcs this long and I don't have one. And while this is certainly a much smaller version of it, we have the Death Dread up next. And the Death Dread, straight to S tier. It's a 4-armed dreadnought. It's so cool. I love the different face plates you can put on it. Love how customizable it is with all the different weapons. Its legs are a little on the stiff side because they're just one piece. But the Death Dread is still just so cool. You know, I don't think I've ever met someone who didn't like the Death Dread, right? It's so orky, and having 4 arms is just cool. It's a General Grievous dreadnought. What is there not to like? And of course, super customizable, great bits box. Like enhancer, because whatever you equip this thing with, you're going to have a suite of stuff left over. Super useful for adding on to your other orky vehicles. And it's just overall a fantastic, fantastic miniature. Next up, we have the smallest version of an Orc Dreadnought, the Killa Cans. I quite like Killa Cans as well, unsurprisingly. They're very cool. I like the sort of aesthetic. They're definitely somewhere between a Dreadnought and, like, heavy infantry, because they're big. Killa Cans are not small. These are, if you didn't know, Gretchen, actually. That's why they're more accurate at shooting. And they're just really beefy. They're really clanking. I like their melee weapons. The ranged weapons included in the kit, while they do look nice, are unfortunate that they don't include enough options, or even all the options, as there's no Grotzuka included. But Killa Cans are really, really cool. I'm not going to put it quite in the same tier as the Death Dread and the Stampa, but I'm going to put it at just behind the Chaos Knights. And that's liable to change. Next up, we have the War Walker for the Eldar. And I'm going to give him a high B tier. It's basically an Eldar Sentinel, and we haven't gotten him to him yet, but I quite like Sentinels. I'm going to spoil that. It's got, 2 hard points for some big weapons. It's pretty lithe. It's very fitting for the Eldar. It works as an Eldar scout vehicle. And I actually do quite enjoy Eldar models, so even though this guy's quite old, I think he came out in 1999, I think he holds up quite well, and is overall just a really cool model. I definitely wouldn't mind running a few of these in my army. Next up, we have the Wraith Lord. The Wraith Lord is absolutely sick. I love the Wraith Lord. The giant ghost glaive, super cool. Being able to have the 4 weapon hardpoints, you have the infantry weapons on his arms, and you can mount pretty much anything on his shoulders. So you go dual bright lance for the cool long-barreled look, or dual star cannon, something like that. He's super customizable, pretty posable if I remember right. And I love painting the Wraith constructs. They're super easy to paint. They take dry brushing really well, but honestly, just highlighting all the bumps on them just makes them look so sick. And then just a little bit of edge highlighting, they look fantastic. When I do play my Eldar on occasion, it's pretty much always Wraiths, like lots of Wraiths. And to complement that, we have the Wraith Lord's little brothers, the Wraith Guard / Blades, but I'm just using the picture for the Wraith Guard, mainly because I prefer them, but both of them are pretty much the same in my mind. I just like the D cannons. Because euphemism. The Wraith Guard are really cool. They're sort of in the same tier as killa cans almost, where they're somewhere in between infantry and walkers, even though they are technically walkers. Actually, I think they might have the infantry keyword, but who cares? And overall, I just love the Wraith Guard. Of course, include a lot of bits, which is a nice benefit, though not something I'm super worried about. Just like to point it out when I can. I love their head shapes. I love their armor. They're just big Eldar, which is cool because if you know me, you know I like big, heavy infantry. Next up, we have the Wraith Knight. And the Wraith Knight is also really cool. The Wraith Knight, very, very cool. Just a big Wraith Lord, basically. And I like Wraith Lords, so by extension, I like the Wraith Knight. But I like the Wraith Lord a little more because it's smaller. I don't know. There reaches a point where I kind of like the smaller walkers more than the giant walkers. Next up, we have the Sentinels. Starting off with the Armored Sentinel, absolutely an A tier. Love the Armored Sentinel. It's just such a cool... it's an ATST. And while I wouldn't say I'm much of a Star Wars fan these days, even though I'm actually going to see Return of the Jedi in theaters tomorrow, I still love the original trilogy, as I'm sure many people do, despite the very sad state Star Wars has been in for the last 20 years, but I suppose that's a topic for another day. Sentinels are like super ATSTs, and ATSTs are super cool, and therefore you make a super version of that, and it's super cool, and Sentinels are super cool. I love Sentinels, specifically the armored ones. They get to carry a big weapon, they get to carry the cool missiles. Overall, really cool models. Next up, we have the Scout Sentinel, which I'm not quite as high on as the Armored Sentinel. I generally prefer the more armored versions of things, and so I'm going to put the Scout Sentinel probably just behind the War Walker. It's on the same tier as sort of the Invictor Tactical War Suit in my mind. Next up, we have the Knight Castellan, or Knight Tyrant, for the Chaos players like me. And I quite like the Knight Castellan. It's not my favorite Knight, but it's certainly pretty high up there. It's got the akimbo giant weapons going on. And I like the sort of walking fortress aesthetic. It has the it has 3 carapace-mounted weapons, and then it's got 2 of the sort of turret-mounted weapons you usually only see 1 of on the smaller knights. And I just really quite like the Knight Tyrant, or Knight Castellan, if you will. And just the Knight Questoris, which is up next, I'm going to put just behind the Chaos Knights, just because I slightly prefer the aesthetic of the Chaos Knights. But there's not that much in it. The Knights, though, very cool models, really fun to put together, very posable, lots of space to have some fun painting things, even though I think I only painted mine with 3 colors, but, that was a rush paint job. And I love the Knights, right? They're cool. They're giant walking robotic Knights. What's not to like? Yeah, they're very cool. Next up, we have Mortifiers, and Mortifiers are alright. Probably like it more than Penitent Engines, but probably the lowest on the list so far. But I still like them. They're still cool. I like the buzz saws they can take. Is that only on Penitent Engines? Speaking of Penitent Engines. So Penitent Engines are people who have committed crimes, and then Mortifiers are sisters that have failed to repent. Something like that. But they occupy the same space in my brain. Unsurprisingly, they're, built on the same kit. And they're fine. They're nothing special. They're fairly standard walkers, despite their sort of churchly fittings. I find a lot of the other walkers to be a lot more memorable. Paragon warsuits are fine. I think these are very divisive models. Some people really like Paragons, some people really don't. I'm probably more towards the I like them, but I'm not in love with them. I think the Paragons they're fine. I'll put them above the Invictor. No, I'll put them below the Invictor. They're not bulky enough, and that's a lot of what I want. They're not bulky and they're not tall enough. Because if you're going to be slender, you got to be tall like the Aeldari. But if you're going to be short, you got to be bulky like the killa cans. Next up, we have War Dogs. War Dogs are fine. I don't have much of an opinion on them. They're just kind of they're the kind of thing you would see in the background of old Warhammer art, right? Just kind of, they're the filler. And I know that's, people like War Dogs, and I do like War Dogs, but they're just kind of, they're not that memorable to me. Ghost Keel, on the other hand, I quite like the Ghost Keel. I'm going to put this above the Mauler Fiend, but below the Hellbrute. Storm Surge, super cool. I like the big, an Ion Raker. I like both of its weapon options, is what I mean to say. And the fact that it's just a giant mech that has a stealth generator is really cool. When I was first getting back into Warhammer back in 2020, 2019 maybe, I remember looking at the Ghost Keel and being like, yo, this is so sick. When did the Tau get this update? And I still stand by that. The Ghost Keel is really, really cool. Next up, we have the Storm Surge, and while I do like Giant Walkers, not the biggest Storm Surge fan. I think this is going to be a common sentiment. I just wish it had arms. I quite like the big Ion Cannon, but yeah, it just needs arms. I'll put it there, just behind the Invictor. Because the Invictor has a pistol-heavy bolter. How can I not like that? Broadsides. Love broadsides. They get to carry the big rail cannon, and they carry it like the heavy from TF2. And that's my favorite class in TF2, with maybe some heavy, Engineer might be my favorite. But regardless, I think this suit is awesome. I love the hammer, the big rail cannon. We'll say the missile pod's not quite as cool as the giant rail cannon, and I would never build them with that. But that's true of most things. If you can take a rail cannon, why wouldn't you take a rail cannon? Next up, we have the Contemptor Dreadnought. So out of the Dreadnoughts, the Contemptor isn't my least favorite, but I think it's my second. Granted, it is far above my least favorite. But the Contemptor's fine. I like that it has a chain fist. That's very cool. It did allow it to one punch a knight in the last edition. I remember when that happened. I'll probably put it just above the Venerable, the Space Wolves Venerable Dreadnought. Now, we're getting back to an S tier with the Leviathan Dreadnought. Love the Leviathan. So cool. It's huge. It's got big guns, or big melee weapons. Very bulky, very heavily armored. And it's just really cool. And I was really happy to see it move from resin to plastic. I'm sure most people were. But yeah, it's just such a sick design, right? I mean, it's not as big as a Redemptor, but it's still beefy. It's not as tall, but I'd say it's a lot more stout, just given how huge and curved all of its armor is, which is rather un-Space Marine-like, but I think it works quite well. Deredeo. This is my least favorite Dreadnought. I do not like the Deredeo in pretty much any way. I can enjoy ranged Dreadnoughts, but the Deredeo, it just looks too squat. It's like someone hit it with a bowling ball on the head in a cartoon. Yeah, I'm going to put it above the Penitent Engines, but that's probably as far as the Deredeo goes. Really don't like the Deredeo. Cerastus Knight Lancer. It's pretty cool. The Cerastus Knights in general, this also includes the one with the big bolt cannon and the giant flamer. I'm generally just lumping them all together because the Lancer is much cooler than them. The Lancer is pretty cool. I probably like it pretty similar to how I like the Questoris, if not a little bit more. The shield and spear look is just really cool. Here is my favorite Imperial Knight, the Acastus Knight Porphyrion. This is a bit of a white whale miniature for me. I really want to get one, but $600 is no small amount for some toy soldiers. But still, I'm gonna put this one probably right behind the Venerable Dreadnought. Also, hold on, I'm gonna flip this around. I like the Death Dread more. The Acastus Knight Porphyrion, right? Huge. This thing's the size of a Warhound. It's got ginormous las cannons. They're what, Magna las cannons or Magnus las cannons. They do crazy things, which is what you expect. It's got the huge missile pod on the back that opens up and then just spews out missiles. I quite like the hunched over look. It's almost like a Knight Terminator in a way, given how its armor works. It's just such a cool design. It is like, if I could move any resin model to plastic, it would be the Acastus Knight Porphyrion. It's just such a cool model. I want to run 3 of them. I don't care that that's not even possible in most games, but it's just such a cool model, right? Like, I love it. It's the perfect Imperial Knight. On the other hand, Acastus Knight... Oh, what the hell is this one called? Acastus Knight... it's not Atropos. Acastus Knight... Asterius. That's right. The Acastus Knight Asterius don't like this knight. One of my least favorite knights, easily. I think the arms are what ruins it for me, which is funny, because that's what I criticized the Storm Surge for. But the Porphyrion just looks better. It just does. And also, las cannons are just cooler weapons than conversion beams. Though, I just don't like it. The Asterius just doesn't do it for me. It loses a lot of its bulkiness by having the sort of arm constructs, right? Because instead of being this egg of armor, it's more of a kind of weird, lanky gun turret. And also its armor's not quite as ornamental. So, down there it goes. Excuse me. Taunar Supremacy armor. I like the Taunar. I do quite like the Taunar. I'm probably gonna... Sorry. Gonna clear my throat. I'm going to put the Taunar probably right here. I like the Taunar a lot. Not particularly in this format, though I do like the Triaxis. What the hell are they called? Triaxis blasters is what we're going to call it. I just wish it was equipped with the giant rail cannon, because once again, if you can take a rail cannon, oh, why wouldn't you take a rail cannon? The Taunar is so sick, though. Very imposing. It's huge. Its effect, well, it is the Tau Titan, right? That's its purpose. And if I was going to collect Tau, there's a very solid chance that I would have one of these in my collection. Official or otherwise is up for debate. But the Taunar is just so cool, right? It's so awesome. And surprisingly, for the sort of the Titan class things, I believe it's the cheapest one. Not that that's saying much. It's still going to be, about $500 to put this thing together. But even still, that's cheaper than pretty much everything else in this weight class. Nemesis Dread Knight, not a fan, which is not a unpopular opinion, I'm sure. I think the Nemesis Dread Knight would go from like a 1 to a 10 with one simple change if they treated it more like a dreadnought. Say like a Grey Knight loses his limbs or, gets bisected, and then he's grafted onto a Dread Knight as like that being his new body, would be really unique and really cool and would look sick. And also would have, some parity with, a mortal giving up their form for something more powerful. In the case of the demons who they hunt, becoming a demon prince. In the case of the Dread Knight, becoming a Dread Knight instead of a normal Marine. Hell, honestly, if you wanted to make it instead of being you have to, get critically injured, why not make the Dread Knight a choice, right? You're a Grey Knight, you're doing well, you're up for promotion, and the choice is yours. Do you give up what little freedom you have to be interred into a Nemesis Dread Knight body, or do you stay as a normal Marine? But as it is now, it's boring. I don't like the Dread Knight, and I'm not surprised that a lot of people don't like it. Gorkanaut, on the other hand, very solid. I love the Gorkanaut. Very cool. This also counts for the Morkanaut, but they're practically the same thing. Gorkanaut, super cool. Love him. Big clanking, has a giant Gatling cannon or a giant laser gun. What's not to like? I'm actually going to put Killicans above them, because I like Killicans a little more. There's a pluckiness to the Killicans, right? They're the little guys. Revenant Titan. Revenant Titan is pretty cool. Interestingly, one of the only Titans that comes with all of its parts in one thing. I'm not exactly sure why that is, but it is. The Revenant is pretty cool. I'm probably going to put it with the Wraith Knight. They're pretty similar in my mind. Yeah. Next up, the Phantom Titan. So, Phantom Titan is a real big Revenant Titan. And that's really all there is to say about that. Can take a ginormous sword, which is really cool. Which definitely gives it some bonus points. I'm going to put it right behind the Taunar. They are both very cool Xenos Titans that are awesome. And that's all there is to be said about that. Now we're on to the Adeptus Titanicus. First up, Nemesis Warbringer, the Anti-Titan Titan. The Nemesis is okay, is what I would give it. I would give it an okay. Not the biggest fan of the hunched over look on most of the Titans. Maybe I'll bump this up to above the War Dogs. And the Nemesis, the Nemesis Warbringer isn't a Titan that really sticks out in my mind. It's just not. It doesn't really have as much of a unique identity. I like it because it's a Titan, and who doesn't like Titans? But it's just not for me. Granted, it's kind of halfway house on the Titans on the whole. Because I also really don't like the Reaver Titan. The Reaver Titan to me is very lanky. It doesn't look as substantial as a lot of the other Titans do. One person did say that its mask reminded them of like a Bionicle mask, a Kanohi, but it still doesn't work for me, even though I'm a huge Bionicle fan. Not the biggest fan of the Reaver Titan. It just looks a little silly, and I like silliness in my Warhammer, but there's an art to being silly, like the Stompa. Now, for our last two entrants here, we have the wonderful Warhound, the first Titan I ever saw, because my game store in Santa Monica actually used to have one of these. May they rest in peace now that store got closed down. That was a sad day when I returned home and saw that they were gone. But the Warhound is really cool. I'm going to put it right above the Leviathan, because these guys they're enemies. The Stompa and the Warhound are about the same size. Warhound Titan, really cool. I love, this is how you do the hunched over look, in my opinion. And overall, Warhound is just really cool. Chaos Warhound looks a little cooler, though. And then, of course, we have the meme, the Toddler Walker itself, the Warlord Titan, the biggest model, not counting the Manta, that Warhammer sells. And this thing is, it is truly a baffling model to behold. If you've ever seen a Warlord Titan in person, you know what I mean. It truly is, it's staggering how huge this thing is. I can't even imagine how long it would take to paint one of these things. It's just comical, really. It's comical. But it's also so awesome. It is easily the coolest Titan. I'm going to put it right next to the Knight Asterius. Porphyrion. Because to be honest, as much as I like the Warlord Titan, I kind of like the Acastus Knight Porphyrion more. Though everything in S tier, honestly, could be interchanged. I love all those walkers, and honestly, pretty much everything in A tier could be up there if they wanted to. Anyways, that wraps up this video. I've been Spoons Rattling. I hope you enjoyed it. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you all next time.